After 1930, Japan entered an aggressive phase of territorial expansion driven by economic pressure, nationalism, and military dominance over the civilian government. The global context of the Great Depression severely damaged Japan's export-dependent economy, increasing unemployment and social instability. Many Japanese military leaders concluded that territorial expansion was necessary to secure raw materials, food supplies, and strategic security, especially as Japan lacked natural resources such as oil, coal, and iron.
The first major step in Japan's post-1930 expansion was the invasion of Manchuria in 1931. Following the Mukden incident, in which Japanese officers staged an explosion on a Japanese-owned railway and blamed Chinese forces, the Japanese Kwantung Army invaded Manchuria without approval from Tokyo. This demonstrated the growing power of the military and the weakness of civilian leadership. By 1932, Japan had established the puppet state of Manchukuo, placing the former Chinese Emperor Puyi as its nominal ruler. In reality, Manchukuo was controlled by Japan and exploited for its industrial and agricultural resources.
The international response to the Manchurian invasion was limited. The League of Nations condemned Japan's actions in the Lytton Report, stating that Japan had no legitimate claim to Manchuria. However, no military or economic sanctions followed. In response to the criticism, Japan withdrew from the League of Nations in 1933, signaling its rejection of international cooperation and its willingness to pursue expansion through force. This lack of consequences reinforced the belief among Japanese leaders that aggression would go unpunished.
Throughout the early 1930s, Japan continued to expand its influence in northern China, using military pressure and political manipulation. Tensions escalated into full-scale war in 1937, following the Marco Polo Bridge incident near Beijing. This event marked the beginning of the Second Sino-Japanese War. Japanese forces rapidly advanced into Chinese territory, capturing major cities such as Beijing, Shanghai, and Nanjing.
One of the most infamous events of this war was the Nanjing Massacre in late 1937. After capturing the city, Japanese troops committed widespread atrocities against Chinese civilians and prisoners of war, including mass executions, rape, and looting. Estimates of the death toll range from 200,000 to 300,000 people. The massacre damaged Japan's international reputation, highlighting the extreme brutality of its military campaign, but again failed to provoke decisive international intervention.
By the late 1930s, Japan aimed to dominate East Asia economically and politically through the idea of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. This concept claimed to promote Asian unity and liberation from Western imperialism. In reality, it served as a justification for Japanese imperial control and economic exploitation of occupied territories. Countries under Japanese influence were forced to supply raw materials and labor to support Japan's war economy.
Japan's expansion increasingly brought it into conflict with Western powers, particularly the United States, which had significant economic and strategic interests in China and the Pacific. Japan's invasion of French Indochina in 1940 to 1941 was a critical turning point. This move threatened Western colonial possessions and access to Southeast Asian resources, especially oil. In response, the United States imposed economic sanctions, including an oil embargo, which posed a severe threat to Japan's military and industrial capacity.
Facing the prospect of economic collapse, Japanese leaders decided that war was preferable to withdrawal. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, aiming to neutralize American military power in the Pacific. This attack brought the United States into World War II. Simultaneously, Japan rapidly expanded across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, capturing territories such as Hong Kong, the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies. These conquests provided Japan with access to vital resources, particularly oil and rubber.
Initially, Japanese expansion was highly successful due to surprise, superior planning, and weakened European colonial powers distracted by the war in Europe. However, Japan's empire was overstretched and its industrial capacity was limited compared to that of the United States. From 1942 onward, the tide of war began to turn against Japan, especially with defeats such as the Battle of Midway.
In conclusion, Japanese expansion after 1930 was driven by economic necessity, militarism, and nationalist ideology. Early successes in Manchuria and China emboldened the military and exposed the failure of international institutions to deter aggression. However, Japan's continued expansion ultimately provoked overwhelming opposition from Western powers, leading to its defeat in 1945 and the collapse of its empire.